In 2005, gender groups came together as the Southern African Gender Protocol Alliance to lobby for an all-encompassing and binding instrument to set and measure progress in achieving targets for gender equality in the region.
The SADC Gender Protocol has been signed by 13 countries out of 15 SADC countries, and 12 of them have ratified the protocol. Out of those 13 that have signed and 12 that have ratified, 10 have deposited their instruments.
The Southern African Gender Protocol Alliance campaigned for the adoption and ratification of the SADC Gender Protocol. Now the 15 network partners are taking the campaign to greater heights in the countdown to 2015 with a key focus on implementation.
The alliance work is implemented in the 15 countries, 15 SADC countries. We've got our focal country networks in all the countries that we work with. With the alliance network, our strength relies on our partners, the country networks. We work with them, and we also work with consultants, researchers, who then bring together information every year. We track the progress using the SADC Gender Protocol Barometer.
That the work starts at regional level, where we divide roles in terms of what are the country-specific activities that we'll be working on as alliance members.
To hold governments accountable for the SADC protocol targets, Gender Links and its alliance partners have conceptualized and compiled the SADC Gender Protocol Barometer series to illustrate and provide tangible evidence of progress and challenges in the implementation of the SADC Gender Protocol.
The barometer is one of the key tools for monitoring change happening against the SADC Gender Protocol. We really want to see change in progress around the thematic areas.
The Southern African Gender Protocol Alliance is acutely aware that raw numbers do not always capture the mobilizing and inspirational qualities of the protocol. For this reason, it is a significant sign of engagement and application that the Alliance has collected over 1,000 case studies which give meaning and texture to achievements and challenges in the plight to achieve gender equality in the region.
The protocol at work. You know, we have that process as well as an alliance of assessing how governments are actually doing on the ground in terms of applying, you know, the commitments related to the 28 targets.
The 2013 barometer draws on a rich database of the SADC at Work case studies featuring 75 cases from 13 countries. Most of these were drawn from the SADC Protocol at Work summits that took place in 12 SADC countries before the regional summit was held in Johannesburg in 2013. The SADC Gender Protocol Barometer is based on inputs from the Southern African Gender and Development Index and the Citizen Scorecard, which gives ordinary men and women the chance to hold their governments accountable. As the 2015 target approaches, the Southern African Gender Protocol Alliance is once again taking stock on what has been achieved and what remains for gender equality in the Southern African region.
The 28 targets of the SADC protocol have a deadline of 2015, and 2015 is just about upon us. The first thing we have to do is accelerate the momentum to 2015. We should not let our governments off the hook. A lot can be done, a lot can be achieved before 2015.
While the performance by SADC countries improved from 2009 to 2013, indices from the Southern African Gender and Development Index balanced each other out between 2012 and 2013, leaving the index static over this period. During this time, the Citizen Scorecard that complements the SGDI increased by 11 percentage points from 55 to 66%. The Citizen Scorecard finding is significant because it shows that men and women are beginning to feel that gender concerns are on the agenda, even if their objective realities have not changed. Using green and red lights as illustrations of progress and setbacks, the SADC Gender Protocol Barometer reveals the work that lies ahead for gender activists, while acknowledging the achievements made to date. A key challenge remains the prevalence of patriarchal attitudes in all spheres of life. This is reflected in gender stereotypes in schools, the workplace, and in the media. Predominantly, male decision-making structures prevail in almost all areas.
To start with, even our constitution, in section 18C of our constitution, still prohibits, say for example, inheritance of women. So there is no other way in which women in Lesotho can have freedom of gestation, because the constitution as the supreme law also prohibits that.
Now we have taken this process of constitution as a critical and very, very strategic position. NGOs, civil society organizations, and women activists, including the Ministry of Gender, we have been working together to make sure that the areas of concerns that the previous constitution had are addressed well. We are lucky some of the critical issues like 50-50 have been considered into the draft that has just come out.
There's no sort of discrimination in language in all our laws, so they've removed that. So the laws are sort of gender neutral. And then what we've done as well, and the Constitution itself, it says that there shall be no discrimination on account of sex, religion, creed. You see, just to tell you that the highest document of the country that you use, the Constitution itself, it says there shall be no discrimination.
You are aware that Zimbabwe has recently adopted the most progressive constitution in terms of women's rights. And actually we were using the SADC protocol as a lobbying tool during our advocacy campaigns for incorporation of gender issues in the new constitution. You'd want to know that the new constitution actually provides for equal representation of men and women in all key sectors of governance and in all government institutions and establishments.
Another challenge facing the region is an apparent backward movement in the election of women to political office. There has been a decrease in women's representation both at national and local level in Angola and Swaziland between 2012 and 2013.
I'm just coming from Zimbabwe now, for instance, where there's been a decline in women's representation in local government from 18 to 16% in the last elections, even though there was an increase at the national level because there was a quota for women at the national but not at the local.
Lesotho, for example, has very high numbers of women in the public service, but they are very badly represented in parliament and so on. And I know that in South Africa, that level, the technical level, I think South Africa does not do very well, but they do fantastically in the field of cabinet and parliament. So it's a mixed picture.
Mauritius did, which I think is exemplary, is that despite having a first-past-the-post system, which is a system common in most SADC countries, or quite a number of SADC countries, they found a way of implementing a quota for women in local government. So they required that at least 30% of the candidates be women.
Zambia is lagging behind in terms of the numbers in governance and also women's representation, although there are milestones in terms of in certain sectors. There are milestones. For instance, for the first time we have a woman Inspector General. For the first time we have a woman Chief Justice.
Education is still the bright star of the SADC region, with gender parity rapidly being achieved at all levels. The study reveals that the gender division of labour between subjects is slowly changing, and this will eventually result in a change in the gender division of labour in the workforce.
In terms of education, the number of girls being enrolled into school is high, and also we have good policies that have been passed to support the implementation of the protocol. For instance, we have for the first time girls going back after they give birth, they get pregnant, back to school.
So you have in the SADC region a very big mix of countries with high levels of literacy and countries with quite low levels of literacy. Where levels of literacy are low, women's levels are lower than men. But where they're high, they're equally high.
The 2013 SADC Gender Protocol Barometer shows that the economy is still in the domain of men.
To educate a woman is to educate a nation. And we can ask ourselves, what does gender have to do with growth and development? It's something that we think about a lot at the World Bank. You can't exclude more than 50% of the world's population. By excluding women, you're excluding half the productive and economically active population. We know that research from around the world has shown that gender inequality tends to slow economic growth, and it makes the rise from poverty more difficult.
Women are still not where the decisions are made. If we look at the economic setup in the region, the women are the majority of the unemployed, the dispossessed, the underemployed, those in the informal sector, in the survivalist sector. So on basically every count, women are secondary to men. If you look at the average earnings of women in just about any sector, they're significantly lower than men.
Gender violence remains the most telling indicator of a woman's lack of rights and agency. The high levels of gender violence revealed by recent prevalence surveys show that nearly 1 in 3 women have experienced some form of gender violence over their lifetime, often multiple times and in multiple forms of violence.
Recently we've had, I think, a 3-year-old girl who was raped and killed by a father. Apparently the father was fighting the mother, and the mother ran into another house where the mother-in-law was, and then the men beat the both of them, and then they ran, and left the child inside the house.
Ultimately what all of this boils down to, including GBV, is about gender inequality and changing people's attitudes. Because in a public sort of way, in a public sphere, people are extremely politically correct and believe women and men should be equal. But then you ask the question, should women obey their husbands? And both women and men agree with that in a large majority. So it really is, shifting, looking at attitudes, not necessarily at that public awareness level, but how do we get into people's homes and start challenging these attitudes?
There is a huge amount of underreporting of gender violence. A key clue as to why that is so is the fact that the largest proportion, the biggest percentage of gender violence is emotional, psychological abuse. There's no category for that in the police. So of course it's not reported because it's not recorded in that way. So it simply doesn't exist in police statistics.
While HIV/AIDS related deaths have been reduced from 2001 to 2013, these gains are threatened by a reality where young women remain the majority of those infected, as well as those who bear the burden of caring for people with AIDS.
When we look at HIV and AIDS and gender, gender-based violence, we can't really, deal with them. We can't talk about them apart. They go hand in hand. If you are forced if sexual encounter takes place under forced circumstances, then it means you're not in a position to negotiate condom use.
There are gaps, and these are some critical gaps we need to address. So for example, in the health section, we focus a lot on sexual and reproductive health. And I believe that now we're seeing that issues of water, sanitation, etc. are really important to women's general health and families' general health. So these are things we have to consider moving into the post-2015 agenda.
Women bear a disproportionate burden of conflict wherever it occurs, yet are absent from the peace processes and decision-making. In the SADC region, the potential for conflict remains high in Madagascar, Zimbabwe, and the DRC. There is evidence that media houses are beginning to take gender mainstreaming seriously, with 47 media institutions representing 19 newsrooms in the SADC region having gender policies.
But I think we still have a lot of work to do around building the media's consciousness too of how gender equality and women's rights is central to everything that they report on. We are seeing progress in many countries. We are seeing a lot of issues coming onto the media's agenda about better policy frameworks, not only in the public, but within the media itself.
My experience with the media is most of the time the women's voices are never heard. Women's news is no news. And most of the time, the stories you hear about women, whether they are in leadership, in cabinet, or the women out there, it is the negative stories.
The story of women is undertold. The story of women is trivialized. So you actually need the media to position the story and for women's voices to be heard. It's even better if the media itself is gender sensitive, because they also tell the story with responsibility and not trivialize it.
Climate change will affect all countries in all parts of the world, but its impact will be felt differently around regions and different groups of people. The most affected are likely to be the poor and women living in developing countries.
It is one of the issues we as an alliance are saying the post-2015 agenda needs to take into account the issue of the gendered impact of climate change, so that governments start integrating gender concerns into their climate change strategies and policies.
Through our networks, particularly the networks in Mozambique, in Seychelles, in countries, Mauritius, that are affected by climate change, have really brought to our attention the true dimensions of this issue and also its gendered impact.
And the SADC Gender Protocol of 2012 shows that there's a glaring gap. There's not even information relating to gender and climate change. There are many, many holes, and we need to ensure that women in decision making are taking on this challenge and ensuring that a policy framework is developed that is sound and can take us to where we need to be.
Now that the protocol has been ratified, the focus has shifted to implementation. The SADC Gender Unit, Alliance National Focal Networks, and GenderLinks have developed a learning and sharing model to cascade and upscale these efforts.
And what we're trying to encourage now, because this works very well, is peer learning and sharing. So if Namibia has done it, Namibia does it well, and Namibia demonstrates and speaks to their SADC counterparts about how they did it, then we see that the lights go on and the other gender ministries begin to come to the party.
We are leaving this meeting with great momentum by all member states to go back and engage appropriately, following the necessary steps required to align their action plans to the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development.
Looking beyond 2015, the SADC Gender Protocol Alliance has begun identifying gaps in the current gender frameworks and will focus on strengthening alignment between policy and implementation.
This is an opportunity for us as SADC to strengthen our own position post-2015, because as we've worked with the SADC protocol, we've realized that it does have limitations. It was always a compromise document. There were certain rights aspects that were compromised and that we feel could be stronger.
Now it's time for the Alliance to push for more accountability to the issues of gender equality and women's rights. So that means we have to reflect, step back, and see how we mobilize with new strategies to build a greater consciousness to create this accountability among our leaders within the SADC region.
Gender's on the agenda, okay, in simple terms. And that wasn't so 5-10 years ago. That's what the protocol has done. It's put it on the political agenda. This year we had a summit in Malawi. We had our first and only woman president, chairing SADC. She stood up in terms of her male, in front of her male heads of state and said, this is the year of women in SADC. You see, that speaks to citizens. And then, sometimes they even forget the grinding day-to-day realities because they think there's hope.